All right, welcome everyone to our second presentation. Thank you, Jill Jarecki from Cure SMA United States. She's the Chief Scientific Officer from the Scientific Advisory Board. We collaborate annually on the research here in Canada, and we receive advice on who to fund through the Scientific Advisory Board and make those decisions jointly. And you know, we know that Jill is just a wealth of information, and thank you so much, Jill, for coming and speaking for us. And I hand the reins over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak about how we're thinking about SMA research right now. And I hope that you can learn a few things from my talk. So Cure SMA, and along with Cure SMA Canada, has been funding research since 1984. And we fund research in these 5 different areas: basic research to understand the disease biology, and find seed ideas for drug discovery, and then drug discovery to take these seed ideas and make practical new therapies. Then we also invest in clinical and regulatory work to help build the infrastructure to more efficiently approve new drugs. And more recently, we've been doing care research through Dr. Mary Schroth, our CMO, to improve patient care and quality of life. And I won't talk much about it today, but she has a new project building a clinical care network and a clinical data registry to collect real-world evidence about the state of SMA and the drugs and how they perform, the FDA-approved drugs and how they perform in the real world. And then, of course, we have our clinical care and researcher meeting to share and promote progress. Of course, we conduct all of this research in order to have approved drugs for SMA patients. We're not doing research just for the idea of doing research, but just point out that research takes quite a long time, and there are a number of steps that go along the way. And we had the discovery of the SMA gene in 1995. And 5 or 6 years later, we had the first drug studied in mice, in the mouse models that were identified and developed soon after the gene was discovered. In 2011, we had the first clinical trial in SMA, and then 5 years later, Spinraza was approved by the FDA. And then 3 years later, we had Zolgensma approved. And then just last year in August, we've had Evrysdi approved by the FDA, which is the small molecule for SMA, to increase SMN production. And so we really had, you know, 25-year odyssey from the discovery of the gene to FDA-approved drugs. And everything we do is so that we can add more drugs and more options for SMA patients down the line. So this is the FDA, what we call the drug pipeline, and we use it to benchmark ourselves for how we're doing in drug development. And like I just said, the blue lines indicate FDA-approved drugs, and I know many of them are approved in Canada as well. And of course, the first is Spinraza, the antisense oligonucleotide to correct SMN2 splicing. The second, Zolgensma, the gene replacement therapy to replace SMN1 gene. And then the third, Evrysdi, which I just described, the small molecule orally taken to also correct SMN2 splicing. And all of them are disease modifying in order to increase the amount of SMN protein. And we're excited to have multiple different options for different patients. And we also are really focused now on finding cocktail or complementary approaches that can be added on to these disease modifying approaches that are already approved, so that patients can have the most bang for their buck, the most effectiveness possible through a cocktail approach. And the first combination or cocktail drug that's coming down the pike is from Scholar Rock. And I will talk a little bit more about this whole idea and about the Scholar Rock drug in a few slides. So, like I just said, we have this evolving landscape of FDA where the disease has been revolutionized by these three new therapies and has dramatically changed the history of SMA, natural history of SMA. But the most dramatic effects occur after with pre-symptomatic treatment. And of course, our symptomatic patients do get benefit through increases, stabilization, and slowing, all of which are clinically meaningful to patients. But we feel that it's not enough. So like I said, we'd like to layer on these cocktail or combination approaches of drugs to add gain and benefit. And in the US, at least, 40% of all SMA patients currently remain untreated. The older the patient is, the more likely they are to be untreated, and the younger the patient is, obviously, the more likely they are to be treated. So in our older patient population, we still have a lot of unmet medical need. And so the idea that I'm sort of talking about is something that we want everyone to understand, is that SMA is not cured yet, and we still need to do research. We need to still find new avenues and therapeutic avenues that'll be complementary to our approved drugs. And, like I said, we have a different outcome for symptomatic versus patients that are treated with identified by newborn screening. Newborn patients that are identified by newborn screening have extremely dramatic changes in their natural history, but we want more impact for older ages and later stages of SMA. And, here in this slide, you can see in the natural history of SMA untreated, you have a decline. And, with drugs we have now in symptomatic patients, you can have a slower progression, you can have stability, or you can have small improvement. But we're really looking for everyone to have reverse their disease and restore their function long term. So that's the goal of future research in SMA. And we think the approach to take for that would be this combination approach, where we're adding and layering on other types of drugs in addition to the SMN enhancing drugs. And we're excited that the first combination therapy trial started in SMA a few years ago, and they have phase 2 data that I'd like to go over with you. Because for the next part of my talk, I'm going to go over some of the ongoing clinical trials. Not all of these may be available in Canada, but I think it's important to go over them because you can see the future directions and what the next advancements in SMA will be, or we're looking to have them be, by going over these clinical trials. And I wanted to first start out and spend a little bit more time on the Scholar Rock drug data because of the fact that it's our newest data, and like I said, our first combination therapy. So this data for apitegromab was from a trial called Topaz, and like I said, was a phase 2 trial to assess the safety and efficacy of this drug in type 2 or 3 SMA. It targets myostatin and blocks its activation, and this results in muscle bulking. It had 55 patients between the ages of 2 and 21 across 3 cohorts, and the patients received the drug intravenously every 4 weeks, either as a monotherapy or in combination with Spinraza, and they did this for a 12-month period. Cohort 1, in this slide, you see a summary of the 3 cohorts. Cohort 1 was between 5 and 21 years of age and were ambulatory type 3 patients. And they had either monotherapy or combination with nusinersen. Cohort 2 was between 5 and 21 years, and they were either type 2 patients or non-ambulatory type 3 patients who had initiated nusinersen over 5 years of age. Both of these cohorts basically had stability on the Hammersmith score over a year. Next slide. Cohort 3, though, were patients under patients greater than 2 years of age who had initiated nusinersen under 5 years of age. And this basically meant, because we know when nusinersen came out commercially, that the patients were about, most of them, under 6 years of age, 10 years of age. So these patients, so they're the younger group, observed quite a large change on the Hammersmith score. And the Hammersmith score, maybe many of you know, is a motor function score that has 33 items, which are scored whether the patients cannot do them, partially can do them, or completely do them. And so it has a possible 0 to 66 score range. And patients improved on the high dose, 7.1 points on the Hammersmith scale. That's a really impressive change. Just to orient you, in the CHERISH clinical trial of Spinraza, the patients gained 4 points. So this is a big gain. Also keep in mind that these patients had been on Spinraza for a while, so would have had gains from Spinraza to begin with. So this is a pretty exciting result to see a 7-point change in the Hammersmith with this drug coming out from Scholar Rock. And they have announced that they will begin phase 3 registration trials by the end of the year. I would point out that the biggest effect was again seen in the youngest children rather than the adults with SMA. So this is something we always want to keep in mind and be thinking about how we can also think about therapeutic approaches for older patients with SMA. Next. Now I'll just quickly go on and talk about the other clinical trials in SMA, which may or may not be recruiting in Canada, but I think it's important to think about them because this is where SMA research is going in the next couple of years. So there is the DEVOTE trial from Biogen, where they are looking at 152 patients who have a higher dose of Spinraza or nusinersen. The normal dose is 12 milligrams of nusinersen with the 4 loading doses, then followed by maintenance doses. But this trial, they had part A, which is a safety trial where everybody received 28 milligrams of nusinersen for their loading doses, followed by 28 milligrams for their maintenance doses. And this part of the trial is over. And they've moved on to the part of the trial in yellow, in orange here, which is the placebo-controlled part of the trial. So you have different patient groups in this trial. There's an infantile patient group or a later onset patient group. And they all receive 12 milligrams of nusinersen as their loading doses or Spinraza, and then 12 milligrams of their maintenance doses, which of course is the normal regimen. And this would be for patients who had onset under 6 months of age and are less of 7 months currently, or an older cohort between 2 and 10 months of age who sit independently but have never walked. The second group has the same 2 patient profiles, but they are now having loading doses of 50 milligrams of nusinersen and then maintenance doses of 28 milligrams. This Part B of the trial is currently enrolling. You can go to clinicaltrials.gov using this identifier I have at the top, and it will tell you sites that are enrolling around in the US and around the world. And then eventually they're going to move into a Part C, which will be trying this higher dose regimen in adult patients. Biogen also has a trial called RESPOND, which is a different type of combination therapy than what I've been talking to you about. It's a combination therapy of looking at 2 SMN upregulators together. And it is in 60 participants aged 3 months to 36 months with 2 copies of SMN2. They have received Zolgensma commercially, and their physician can deem that the patient had a suboptimal clinical response to Zolgensma and enroll them in a trial where they will receive the commercially approved regimen for Spinraza. So this looks at a combination of Spinraza and Zolgensma to see if you have added benefit by using both of them together. Next, we have Rainbow Fish, which is a trial that's only at a few sites in the US where it looks at pre-symptomatically identified patients with SMA. There are 25 infants up to 6 months of age, and really to get an assessment about how Evrysdi, so now I'm changing drugs, I'm sorry I didn't say that, how Evrysdi will perform in a pre-symptomatic setting. So that's one of the ongoing clinical trials. There are 2 clinical trials that are set to start soon. A timeline hasn't been announced yet. They both have to do with the gene therapy Zolgensma, and the first one is called SMART. And SMART is a trial in children. It's open label, 24 months. 24 participants, 3 months to 17 years. And this, in the US, Zolgensma is approved for patients under 2 years of age. And this is about 8.5, they would weigh about 8.5 kilograms. So this is looking at giving Zolgensma to patients who weigh more than that, up to 21 kilograms, and hence would be older. So the weight range is between 8.5 and 21 kilograms, and 3 months to 17 years. And they would have to be naive to treatment or have discontinued another therapy or treatment. So this will be starting recruitment soon. And you can look up on clinicaltrials.gov what sites may be open around the world. And also, I'm sure we will announce it to the patient community when it begins. And then finally, very recently, Novartis Gene Therapies announced a trial called STEER. And STEER is a global pivotal phase 3 registration study to evaluate the efficacy, safety, and tolerability of what they're calling OAV 101, which is basically Zolgensma being administered intrathecally in the spinal cord like Spinraza would be. The difference is that it's a one-time intrathecal dosing. The trial will be 52 weeks in duration. It will be sham controlled, which means there will be a placebo, but the placebo cohort will receive the drug at the end of the trial. There will be 100 patients. They will be 2 to 18 years of age. They must be able to sit but never have walked. So we do not know other inclusion or exclusion criteria at this point. We don't know what the sites are going to be, and we don't know exactly when this trial will start, but be on a lookout for it because this will be a brand new trial also to bring gene therapy to older patients, but with a different delivery method, the intrathecal method. So now that I've sort of oriented to you to the new drug directions that are already being tested in patients, want to discuss what our strategic goals in research are to help these drugs or these approaches or combinations become approved in the US and across the world, as well as ways to identify novel treatments that we can add on with our currently approved treatments. So here are the strategic goals in research that we have at Cure SMA right now. And it's the fun basic and translational research leading to combination therapies. This includes very basic research to find new targets beyond SMN. We also, secondly, want to enable this new drug development through two mechanisms, which I'll tell you about in a few slides: our industry collaboration and the PNCR clinical trial network. And we are investing in these two areas to help develop the infrastructure and testing means for more effective treatments in older chronically symptomatic patients. These projects include things like trial infrastructure and training, more sensitive outcome measures that may be more appropriate for older patients, and provide patient data to regulators, drug developers, and payers to justify the use of these treatments and understand the landscape of SMA, and also understand the new SMA disease classification, what SMA looks like in this new therapeutic landscape through our patient-reported data project. And it's not on this slide, but also through Dr. Schro's clinical data registry, where she's collecting clinical data from physicians. So, as I said, we have 3 approved SMA dependent approaches, where we know the SMN1 gene is gone, so we're either replacing the SMN1 gene through gene therapy or correcting the SMN2 gene with Evrysdi or Spinraza. But how else can we think about SMA drug development? Well, we can think about it through the SMA Independent strategies. And what are those? Well, here in this slide, you can see a motor circuit, and you see the muscle, and then the motor neuron touching the muscle, telling it to contract. You also have these sensory neurons going back into the spinal cord, providing information to the spinal cord and interacting with the motor neurons and interneurons, and then the motor neuron sending this long axon back out to the muscle. So I think we can think about SMN independent strategies as anything that affects this motor circuit and makes it function better in SMA. Of course, the things that we've had concentrated on the most have been muscle. How can we make the muscle work better? And that's with the Scholar Rock drug and previously with a trial at Cytokinetics. But can we think about it in other ways? Can we have the motor neuron live longer through neuroprotection? Can we increase the signal between, the motor neuron and the increase the signal between the motor neuron and the muscle, and so make that signal stronger? So with less motor neurons, you can activate your muscle more. Can you have regenerative targets where you cause this motor axon to sprout and go out there and cover another muscle that would be over here? And can you just have what I call genetic modifiers, which are totally unknown things that may not even affect this motor circuit, take an agnostic approach and find things that just help correct SMA outside of this motor circuit? So this is how we're thinking about developing add-on or cocktail or combination therapies, whatever you want to call them, for SMA. And so at Cure SMA, pretty much all of our research funding has sort of moved to trying to think about how to do this. And overall, in the last 15 years or so, we have funded 127 basic research grants and 14 preclinical drug projects. But for the last 3 or 4 years, we've really focused our aims for these programs to thinking about these add-on therapies. And that's how we are thinking about funding research at Cure SMA now. And of course, we funded our research in collaboration with Cure SMA Canada since 2000. And we collaborate with Cure SMA Canada on funding grants to Canadian investigators. And I went back and counted where we have data available to me since 2004, where we've co-funded at least 23 grants with Cure SMA Canada, with greater of amount than $2.2 million to 8 different investigators. And this has been a really important collaboration where we've been able to collaborate on funding work on developing new mouse models. For example, we have a grant with Cure SMA Canada trying to develop mouse models that recapitulate mild SMA, so we can test some of these therapies that are more appropriate for adults in these mouse models. We've done work to understand the regulation of SMN function, looking at different aspects of SMA genetics, looking at conducting clinical trials and trying to develop biomarkers for SMA. So then this is a really nice, more than 20-year collaboration between our two groups in funding research. So thank you for that. We're very appreciative and really value that collaboration. So that's how we're thinking about basic research. How are we thinking about promoting clinical trials and helping to develop clinical trial protocols and infrastructure that are more appropriate for teens and adults? Obviously, we have pretty robust clinical trial infrastructure for younger children, and we've had a lot of clinical trials be conducted in younger children, but how do we broaden that out and make things, clinical trials, more amenable to our older patients who we believe could really benefit from these combination therapies like Scholar Rock drug and further clinical trials. And one way we're doing that is funding the Pediatric Neuromuscular Clinical Research Network. I realize it says pediatric, we're talking about older patients, but I think that's just a legacy title. And this is 5 different sites across the US, and they've been conducting a large natural history trial of over 500 patients. They develop key outcome measures used globally in the SMA clinical trials, and they've helped design all of the major drug trials in SMA. And in 2021, we're funding research in them to continue their ongoing history data collection, also to develop a biorepository of patient samples, to do a work on physical therapist education, because one of the requirements for reimbursement for our SMA drugs is seeing stability or improvement on certain outcome measures that may not be well known in clinical settings, but also to help educate physical therapists to conduct clinical trials, and try to also tracking patients by newborn screening and understanding their outcomes, looking at longitudinal evaluation of adults with SMA, because this is one of the reasons we haven't had a lot of trials with adults, and that's because adults, there hasn't been a lot of natural history work done there, and developing and refining new and existing outcome measures in SMA that'll be amenable to some of these cocktail or combination approach trials. And the PNCR is also contributing data to Dr. Schro's clinical data registry. The other way we're trying to do this type of work is with our industry collaborative, and our industry collaborative has been around since 2016. And it's a way that we collaborate with the drug companies working in SMA in a pre-competitive space to build infrastructure around SMA clinical trials. And we have 4 different topic groups where we've done projects. One is on regulatory interaction and outcome measures. One is on increasing clinical trial site capacity and training. The third is education of HCPs and patients to reduce diagnostic time. And one of the things that we developed through the industry collaborative to do that is this website called Smart Moves, which you could check out. And it has a lot of videos and other things to help physicians and families see the early signs and symptoms of SMA. And then our patient-reported data project, which is to collect patient data to understand the SMA landscape. So just to highlight a few things that we've done through our industry collaborative, which I think are quite important, is through our industry collaborative, we really do most of our FDA interactions or regulatory interactions. And we talk to regulators about unmet medical need. And for instance, we had something that's called a critical path innovation meeting in August of 2020 with the FDA to talk to them about the fact that SMA is not cured. And so this critical path initiation meeting occurred last August, so just a year ago. And we had SMA patients and caregivers talk about their perspectives in SMA, what the current treatments have done for their loved ones or for themselves, how they've helped them, but what unmet medical needs they still have. And the patients that attended, along with data that we showed from our patient-reported data project, was that patients are saying that, you know, it makes that they do have unmet medical needs. The current drugs do work, and they think that there are other things that we should be measuring and considering in clinical trials, different endpoints that we should be using than just the motor function scales. And these included things like fatigue scales, bulbar function. What I mean by bulbar function would be chewing, speaking, swallowing, and really emphasize the number of different aspects like that to the FDA. We also talked to them about biomarkers. Biomarkers are things that can predict clinical outcome. I think one of them, just to give you an example so you know what I mean, would be an HIV viral load can predict how sick you are with HIV. So could we have something like that? And we have a candidate called neurofilament that looks like it has some predictive ability in SMA. Can we be using that in clinical trials? And then also talk to them about our need for this combination or cocktail approach and how we may need to change up how we're doing clinical trials a little bit to make that happen. So this is one of the ongoing piece of work that we're always doing, is interacting with regulators to try to make them understand SMA is not cured, that there's more work to do. Through this topic group as well, this theme of new outcome measures. What can we get more sensitive, more nuanced outcome measures? And one of the things that we've funded through Dr. Day's group at Stanford University is the adult test of neuromuscular disorders called the ATTEND. And it's a wheelchair-based assessment, unlike, say, the Hammersmith, where the individual has to get out of the chair and roll around on the floor. This is a test that's more appropriate for older and adults, where they can stay in their wheelchair and do the entire outcome measure and not have to do things that are perhaps more appropriate and more sensitive for children. As I said, just moving along to the other topic groups, another big emphasis is physician education. And we have been doing a lot of survey work. Well, we've been going to a lot of conferences pre-COVID and then virtually during COVID to try to let different types of groups, neurologists, physical therapists, nurse practitioners, pediatricians, understand the needs in SMA. And one of the ways that we've been figuring out what the needs are is to do surveying work of these different populations. And here's just an example of that surveying work, where we asked 600 general pediatricians how they deal with a patient who has decreased motor function. And we discovered that still 25% of these pediatricians are underutilizing motor milestone skills. And unfortunately, 55% of them still don't know that the best way to diagnose SMA is through a genetic test. So even with our three approved drugs worldwide, we still have a lot of work to do in standard of care and educating healthcare providers about SMA. Some other things we've been trying to do here is to develop a telehealth series. And the first one that we did was how you could evaluate an infant and assess them for SMA type 1 through telemedicine. And this, you can watch these videos on Neurology Live or HCP Live, where we distribute them out to a lot of healthcare providers. And this telehealth medicine series is continuing and trying to think of ways that perhaps we can do some assessments in clinical trials with telemedicine to reduce the patient burden, so patients do not have to do so many trial site visits. So spending a lot more time thinking about telehealth and how we can use it in the SMA community to reduce patient burden. As I said before, physical therapy training is really important, both for clinical care, both for ongoing drug access, and both for clinical trials. So we've been funding through our industry collaborative this new effort called Step in SMA to educate physical therapists very broadly about SMA. And this project will only be expanding over the next couple of years and expanding internationally. And we're hoping it will have a big impact both on trials, but also on patient care long-term. Finally, our fourth topic group is a really important topic group, and it's very complementary to collecting clinical data. And I know you have a similar registry in Canada, so want to, really take a shout out to saying how important it is to participate in these type of registries. So and hopefully I'll show you some data to tell you why it's so important to participate in such registries. So at Cure SMA, so this is through topic group 4 of our industry collaborative, which is our patient-reported data project. So we have a database at Cure SMA that has 9,000 affected individuals in the database. And we've collected information from almost 5,000 patients over the past 12 years. And I point that out because we started collecting additional information from them at that time on SMN2 copy number, date of diagnosis, and multiple other things. And of course, the primary reason we have this registry or database is to support the community and give them information, but we also use it for research recruitment efforts, clinical trials, and more recently to track real-time changes in our community. And we've been doing an annual survey every year, which gives us really powerful information that we can use to advocate on behalf of the patient community with industry, insurance payers, and regulators, such as the FDA. And the kind of information that we're collecting there to be more nuanced is what you can see here: SMA type, date of birth, diagnosis date, SMN2 copy number. And, we can get some really powerful data from there, but we also then have a 50-question survey that we're doing every year. And from that data, we're able to see trends like this, which are really, really nice to see, which is in the type 1 and type 2 patient populations, we are seeing a decreasing date for the average age of diagnosis, which we all know early treatment is better. So it's important to get early diagnosis. And in 2020, we've gone from 4.7 months for our average age of diagnosis to 2.7 months. And in type 2 SMA, from 23 months to 13 months. So, this is really exciting information to see and track. In our survey, we also ask questions that we can go back and talk to regulators and payers about where do you believe there are gaps in the current drugs, and where would you like to see impact from future drugs? And you can see that adult patients told us it was in gaining strength, achieving new motor functions, and improving activities of daily living. These were the three highest areas that we hear they want, where new therapies can make the greatest impact. And then we asked questions about what is your current motor function. And you can see in 2017, we only had 13% of self-identified type 1 patients. Of course, in type 1 being defined as never being able to sit, saying they could sit. And now in 2021, we have about almost half of our type 1 patients telling us they can sit. This is a really, really exciting, dramatic change in phenotype that it's important to note. And we know that our current drugs are working, but we also know we want to make further impact and more impact for those 50% who can't sit. So it gives us information on both sides of the coin of how we want to proceed in SMA and track things. We also use our patient-reported data to try to develop patient-reported outcome measures and test them, things that can be used for insurance reimbursement or in clinical trials that are meaningful to patients. We hear from many, many patients that fatigue is important. So this last year, we went out to test 5 different fatigue scales through our patient-reported data project and figure out which one is the best in SMA and which one, perhaps can be used to track clinically meaningful changes in our patient population. So we're really using our patient-reported data project, and I encourage all of you to participate in the Canadian patient-reported data projects to understand the current landscape, how things are changing, to track the progress, but also how things need to continue to change, where we need to continue to make impact, and also using it to try to find ways to add the patient voice to clinical trials with things like this fatigue survey. If patients tell us fatigue is important, can we have the patient directly tell us, how they're being assessed by fatigue and other things using these surveys and validating them? So I hope I've given you sort of a snapshot about how we're thinking about basic research. We've come a long way in the last 20 years, and we're really excited about that. And we want to do more. We're not satisfied with where we are today. So we want to continue to do research to think about how we can develop new therapeutic strategies and novel targets beyond SMN. We then want to do combination. We want to then test in mouse models and other models how different combination therapies with different mechanisms of action, say a muscle drug and an SM enhancer, work. We want to increase clinical trial capacity and physical therapy training to be able to conduct these combination therapies. And we want to do research research into how to have more sensitive and better clinical trial outcomes for these combination trials. We want to continue to do work to understand the patient experience through data collection. And we can then share this data with many different groups to help and advocate for the patient community. I don't have it on this slide, but Dr. Schroth could give an entire talk about her clinical care network and her clinical data registry and her goals there for improving patient care and collecting real world evidence from clinical trial sites. And that's a big part of our goals too. And then we want to encourage newborn screening. I didn't talk about that either directly because this is Dr. Schroth's area, but want to get newborn screening in every state in the US. I think now it's in 36 states, and help groups around the world to institute newborn screening. But we also want to do HCP education to reduce diagnostic delay, to let them know about our treatments, and to let them know about the best standard of care for SMA. So thank you very much. And
Jill, that was absolutely amazing. It's so exciting to see where we are and where we're going. And just to reiterate the importance of research and our continuation of funding research, because it must remain the focus of our organizations, not just access to these treatments. Yes, that's super important. But when you hear that 50% of type 1s are sitting, it's shocking for those of us that have been in the SMA world for all these years. It's fantastic. We were sending out end of life packages very shortly after sending out newly diagnosed packages. But there's so much more to learn. And like you said, there is not a cure yet, and we must continue funding this research. We have very few minutes left. We have another meeting starting shortly after this one, but we do have time for some questions. And if you have a question, just please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Hi there.
Hi, Jan.
Thanks for this awesome presentation. Remember us how important it is to answer to the survey Susie and her team sent to us. We know data is really important things. Maybe I have a question. Do we have any information on other trial can run? They actually run with use commercially drugs like Celebrex or Mestinon. Does my question make sense?
Yes, yes. So both of those drugs have been looked at in SMA. I have not heard an update about either of them in quite some time or seen a publication, but it would be interesting. I would also be interested in learning more about the status of both of those, but unfortunately I don't have information to share with you today. But agree.
Thanks.
And thank you for the tour of your house, Jan.
And a last question, maybe it's I extrapolate, but what's the collaboration we have with the other SMA community around the world? Because I think, fortunately, we live in a rich community, so I know lots of people. We have lots of work to do for all the Canadian or US citizen access to drugs. But what's happened in India, Malaysia? Do we have kind of collaboration or idea what's the pharmaceutical expect to be there? Could we help us or?
So I think there is a lot of work that can be done internationally. And I think it's important work. And like you say, there are a lot of countries that don't have the same access to drugs that we have in the US or Canada. And we are often talking to different groups and giving them advice on different questions they may have. But I think one of our long-term goals is to be able to do more than that and maybe have some more formal programs. I think one of the things we're thinking about is having like an international advocacy day in the next 6 months, where we would invite people, SMA groups from India or, you know, a variety of countries around the world. So it's a really important area, and we recognize that, and I think we're trying to think about how we can make an impact there. But it's also, you know, kind of such a huge, daunting problem that it's, you know, we want to come up with a solution or programs that are doable for us, but also can help people around the world. So, but definitely thinking about that very seriously. So, because we get questions and letters, you know, all the time from people in other countries about this question.
I would love to see Cure SMA hold an international PAG meeting at the next conference, at all the conferences actually, would be amazing.
Yeah. I think that's in the plans. I think they're talking about doing one virtually even before that, but yes, I think that is one of the long-term goals, to have that at the conference.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions for Jill? All right, then with that, Jill, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day. Thanks, Yann, for the tour.
Yep.
Merci aux interprètes. J'ai pu écouter là, la traduction française. Alors, s'ils sont toujours à l'écoute, merci.
Thank you.
All right, have a great day. See you at the next meeting, everyone.